He does not use the boy's name. That made Davos very uneasy. I hope young Edric will recover soon. Stannis waved a hand, dismissing his concern. It is a chill, no more. He coughs, he shivers, he has a fever. Maester Pylos will soon set him right. By himself the boy is not, you understand. But in his veins flows my brother's blood. There is power in a king's blood, she says. Davos did not have to ask who she was. Hey everyone, Crowfood's daughter here, and if you click this video, you have reached the Disputed Lands. In today's video, we will be discussing the concept of the power of king's blood. This is something that is brought up in the fandom every so often, and questions are posed because, well, the information we have regarding this type of sacrifice seems fairly ambiguous. Why is there power in king's blood? What defines a king? Does a king's blood pass down to their descendants? And these are just a few of the questions the readers of A Song of Ice and Fire have posed. In response, we will be exploring where this concept originates, why Melisandre requires king's blood, and speculate on the mechanics for this magic, which may surprise you. Now let's get started. So, king's blood. This is something Melisandre is quite fixated on, and the fandom currently has many theories surrounding what this could mean for the future plotline. You see, Melisandre believes Stannis to be Azor Ahai reborn. He is the Lord's chosen, the warrior of fire. I have seen him leading the fight against the dark. I have seen it in the flames. The flames do not lie, else you would not be here. It is written in a prophecy as well. When the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, Azor Ahai shall be born again amid smoke and salt to wake dragons out of stone. The bleeding star has come and gone, and Dragonstone is the place of smoke and salt. Stannis Baratheon is Azor Ahai reborn. In A Storm of Swords, we learn Melisandre believes the only way this prophecy is to be fulfilled, the only way dragons can be awoken from stone, is through the sacrifice of king's blood. The boy is innocent. The boy defiled your marriage bed, else you would surely have sons of your own. He shamed you. Robert did that, not the boy. My daughter has grown fond of him, and he is mine own blood. Your brother's blood, Melisandre said. A king's blood. Only a king's blood can wake the stone dragon. So, according to Melisandre, only a king's blood can wake a dragon from stone. Only a king's blood can fulfill the prophecy. Sounds easy enough, right? Find a king or someone with blood ties to a king and sacrifice them, and dragons will somehow either literally or metaphorically wake from stone. Well, as straightforward as that may sound, there is one slight problem. With king's blood, I tend to think that Melisandre may have the wrong idea. So when I look at things, I always find myself asking, why? Why is king's blood important? And so I tend to look at the context of how things are mentioned, who's talking about it, and what is being said. So when we look at king's blood within the series, the mentions are very specifically used. And once you start to examine how king's blood is discussed, a pattern emerges. The mentions of king's blood are generally in the context of the Azor Ahai prophecy and waking dragons from stone. Only a king's blood can wake dragons from stone. Who's talking about it? Melisandre is talking about it. And of course the people that are influenced by Melisandre are talking about it. So people within Stannis' circle, they are pretty much a sounding board for what Melisandre has been saying. Pip says that Lady Melisandre means to give him to the flames, to work some sorcery. Pip should learn to hold his tongue. I have heard the same from others. King's blood to wake a dragon? Where Melisandre thinks to find a sleeping dragon, no one is quite sure. While the concept of the power of king's blood could originate from Melisandre's studies in Asshai, where one can learn various forms of higher mysteries in magic, once you look at the context, you begin to realize that the concept of king's blood is probably unique to the Azor Ahai prophecy or legend itself, as she is very particular in needing this specific sacrifice in order to catalyze and fulfill the prophecy that she is so focused on. Outside of Melisandre, or those influenced by Melisandre, there is only one other person who independently mentions the power of king's blood within the series, and that person would be Maester Aemon, who just briefly states there is power in a king's blood when talking to Jon while speculating on Melisandre's desires to obtain Mance's infant child as a sacrifice. There is power in a king's blood, the old Maester had warned, and better men than Stannis have done worse things than this. The king can be harsh and unforgiving, aye, but a babe still on the breast? Only a monster would give a living child to the flames. Now, what you might find interesting here is that within the A Song of Ice and Fire storyline, very few people have referenced reading or having knowledge of this ancient prophecy. However, in A Feast for Crows, we learn that Maester Aemon most certainly has. It was a prince that was promised, not a princess. Rhaegar, I thought. The smoke was from the fire that devoured Summerhall on the day of his birth, the salt from the tears shed for those who died. He shared my belief when he was young, but later he became persuaded that it was his own son who fulfilled the prophecy, for a comet had been seen above King's Landing on the night Aegon was conceived, and Rhaegar was certain the bleeding star had to be a comet. What fools we were, who thought ourselves so wise! The error crept in from the translation. Dragons are neither male nor female. Barth saw the truth of that, but now one, and now the other, as changeable as flame. The language misled us all for 1,000 years. Daenerys is the one, born amid salt and smoke. The dragons prove it. So again, the only other person outside of Melisandre or her circle to mention king's blood having power has also read this prophecy. And when he had mentioned king's blood having power, he had done so in the context of Melisandre desiring a sacrifice in order to wake stone dragons. So when these mentions of king's blood are closely examined, you quickly realize this notion is probably very, very old, and can likely be traced back to the ancient Asshai prophecy of Azor Ahai, or the Valyrian version, known as the Prince That Was Promised, which according to Melisandre, dates back 5,000 years. To put into perspective how ancient this prophecy may be, if Melisandre is correct, and this prophecy dates back 5,000 years in the history of the known world, then that would be the equivalent in our own world to 3,000 years before the birth of Christ, or 1,000 years older than the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Pyramid texts. And now this is where it gets interesting. You see, in our own world, in many civilizations, ancient kings had played a different role and were seen in a different light than their more modern counterparts. In a groundbreaking book by Sir James Frazer, published in the early 1900s, his studies uncovered something spanning across ancient culture after ancient culture, a phenomenon called the sacred or divine king. In many early civilizations, there was no division between church and state. A king was not just a ruler. A king was a king because he was considered sacred and somehow connected to their gods. He was a divine man, often seen as a deity or an incarnation or descendant of their deity, and a term used to describe this status is often known as a god king. Those ancient cultures that did not have god kings would likely instead have priest kings who would serve as mediators, agents, or high priests of the divine realm. The crown is something of a symbol of this sacred and divine right, and is similar symbolically in some respects to a halo. According to James Frazer, when we have said that the ancient kings were commonly priests also, we are far from having exhausted the religious aspect of their office. In those days, the divinity that hedges a king was no empty form of speech, but but the expression of a sober belief. Kings were revered, in many cases, not merely as priests, that is, as intercessors between man and God, but as themselves gods. Now, with the concept of the divine king, what is interesting here is that our author has incorporated this exact concept into his world building. You see, in the World Book, we are being given the ancient histories of the known world of A Song of Ice and Fire, and the phenomenon of the divine king is clearly on display with mentions of the god kings of Ib, the god emperors of Et, the god empress of Leng, the god on earth of the great empire of the dawn. We hear of priest kings, such as the Bloodstone Emperor, who was the first high priest of the Church of Starry Wisdom. We hear of the first king of the First Men, Garth Greenhand, who was said to be more god than man. The Marsh King was similarly rumored to have been a god as well. In the main series, we have Euron mentioning only a godly man may sit the Seastone chair. And of course, we have the Grey King of the Ironborn, who I've discussed in previous videos is cohesive with the drowned god deity, and he was said to have descended to the watery halls to sit at the right hand of the drowned god. We have example after example of this phenomena. However, the best evidence for this can be found in a group of people within our present timeline, the Thenns. The Thenns are a feudal society beyond the wall, who inhabited an isolated valley within the peaks of the Frostfangs. They were a group of first men who were caught behind the wall when the wall originally went up, and because of this, they do not consider themselves wildlings, but rather they refer to themselves as the last of the first men. What we are being given with House Then from a storytelling perspective is something of a time capsule of the first men. It's a tool used to inform the reader of how life and first men culture were back then. So we see they do a lot of the things we are told the first men did. They have basic societal structures with laws and lords. They mine tin and copper to make bronze. They speak the old tongue. They worship the old gods. They do all these things we are told, so they serve as confirmation of how the first men were. However, we are being given one piece of information that we didn't already know, and that piece of information is they see their leader as a god. Jon bowed his head stiffly and went. If all the wildlings were like Styr, it would be easier to betray them. The Thenns were not like other free folk, though. The Magnar claimed to be the last of the first men and ruled with an iron hand. His little land of Then was a high mountain valley hidden amongst the northernmost peaks of the Frostfangs, surrounded by cave dwellers, Hornfoot men, giants, and the cannibal clans of the Ice Rivers. Ygritte said the Thenns were savage fighters, and that their Magnar was a god to them. The Spearwives will be so happy. You might do well to bestow a castle on the Magnar. Jon's smile died. I might if I could trust him. Sigorn blames me for his father's death, I fear. Worse, he was bred and trained to give orders, not take them. Do not confuse the Thenn with free folk. Magnar means lord in the old tongue, I'm told. But Styr was closer to a god to his people, and his son is cut from the same skin. I do not require men to kneel, but they do need to obey. And that is our time capsule right there. So, knowing that the Azor Ahai prophecy is incredibly ancient, it's quite possible that what a king actually was at the time the prophecy was written and what a king is now in the present timeline are not quite the same thing. So it's possible that when the prophecy was written, a king's blood wasn't needed to wake stone dragons because he wore a crown and called himself a king. It's possible king's blood was needed because of their sacred and divine status and their connection to the gods. And when we look at Maester Aemon's comments again, we can see him mention that indeed, error can creep into the translation. Now, going back to Maester Aemon's comments, after hearing about Dany and the events surrounding the hatching of her dragons, he believes she has fulfilled this prophecy, and for good reason. When you think about it, Dany quite literally checks all of the boxes of the Azor Ahai prophecy. Under a bleeding star, dragons are hatched from stone. There is a funeral pyre in the middle of the Dothraki Sea, so in a sense you do have both salt and smoke. You even have a king's blood, as the fandom often points to Khal Drogo as a possibility for this catalyst of waking stone dragons. But what you might not have realized is that there is also holy blood in this ritual. We don't really notice it because we've been told about king's blood. We expect to see it, and we have Khal Drogo right there. So what you may not have paid attention to are the other contents of that ritual, and holy blood is very much present, as Mirri Maz Duur is a priestess. "Who are you?" Dany asked her. "I am named Mirri Maz Duur. I am God's wife of this temple." "Magi," grunted Hago, fingering his arak. His look was dark. Dany remembered the word from a terrifying story that Jiki had told her one night by the cook fire. A magi was a woman who lay with demons and practiced the blackest of sorceries, a vile thing, evil and soulless, who came to men in the dark of night and sucked life and strength from their bodies. Yes, Mirri Maz Duur was a priestess of the Great Shepherd. Now, what is even more fascinating is when you take a look at Euron, we have something very peculiar going on. Euron has returned to Westeros and claims to have sailed to faraway ancient places like Asshai and Valyria, and has returned with several arcane artifacts and knowledge, along with a desire for both conquest and dragons. In the Winds of Winter Forsaken chapter, we see Euron is preparing to make a sacrifice of priests he has collected throughout his travels of the known world, and he is talking about holy blood and Aaron's blood, and about it being very, very useful. "If your drowned god did not smite me for killing 3 brothers, why should he bestir himself for the 4th? Because you are his priest?" He stepped back and sheathed his dagger. "No, I'll not kill you tonight. A holy man with holy blood? I may have need of that blood later. For now you are condemned to live." A holy man with holy blood, Aaron thought when his brother had climbed back onto the deck. He mocks me, and he mocks the god. Kinslayer, blasphemer, demon in human skin. That night he prayed for his brother's death. It was in the 2nd dungeon that the other holy men began to appear to share his torments. 3 wore the robes of septons of the Greenlands, and 1 the red raiment of a priest of R'hllor. The last was hardly recognizable as a man. Both his hands had been burned down to the bone, and his face was a charred and blackened horror, where 2 blind eyes moved sightlessly above the cracked cheeks, dripping pus. He was dead within hours of being shackled to the wall, but the mutes left his body there to ripen for 3 days afterwards. Last were 2 warlocks of the East, with flesh as white as mushrooms and lips the purplish blue of a bad bruise, all so gaunt and starved that only their skin and bones remained. One had lost his legs. The mutes hung him from a rafter. "Pri," he cried as he swung back and forth. "Pri, Pri." Perhaps that was the name of the demon he worships. "The drowned god protects me," the priest told himself. "He is stronger than the false gods these others worship, stronger than their black sorceries. The drowned god will set me free." In his saner moments, Aaron questioned why the Crow's Eye was collecting priests, but he did not think he would like the answer. So Euron is collecting holy blood for an upcoming sacrifice. That much the fandom has gathered. What some might have missed, however, are some hints that Euron may also be very aware of or influenced by the Azor Ahai prophecy himself, as evidenced in Euron's prophetic Shade of the Evening vision. "The bleeding star bespoke the end," he said to Aaron. "These are the last days, when the world shall be broken and remade. A new god shall be born from the graves and charnel pits." Then Euron lifted a great horn to his lips and blew, and dragons and krakens and sphinxes came at his command and bowed before him. "Kneel, brother," the crow's eye commanded. "I am your king. I am your god. Worship me, and I will raise you to be my priest. Never, no godless man may sit this stone chair." If you're new to the fandom or have not frequented the forums, I know what you're probably thinking. What about Melisandre's leeches? Didn't she kill 3 kings with Edric Storm's Kingsblood? Well, this is something that has been discussed in the fandom for many years now, and the fandom has come to a general agreement on the matter. The consensus in the fandom is that the leeches were a deception used by Melisandre in order to manipulate Stannis into sacrificing his nephew. If you are unfamiliar with this concept, I have made a video that summarizes this fan theory that is linked in the description box below. What I did not mention in my video, however, is that this theory has been confirmed in the World of Ice and Fire app and is visible for all to see on the topic of Melisandre, which states, "Melisandre argues that Stannis' only hope for success remains in sacrificing his bastard nephew, Edric Storm, so that she can use the sacrifice to raise one of the stone dragons of the Citadel of Dragonstone to serve Stannis. Selyse and the Queen's men support her, but Stannis wavers, and Davos speaks against it. Melisandre offers to use her magic to kill the remaining usurper kings, stating that if she succeeds, she will have proven her powers, and Stannis should let her sacrifice Edric Storm. What she neglects to tell Stannis is that she has already seen their deaths in her flames, and that the magic is not required to bring them about." So yes, just like Stannis' fake Lightbringer, the leeches were another one of Melisandre's tricks. In truth, there is a good possibility we have not witnessed any true manifestations of what we are told is Kingsblood. So when it comes down to it, I believe that Melisandre may have the wrong idea for what is actually needed. She believes she needs the blood of a king, but in reality, holy blood, the blood of someone connected to the higher powers, may at least be part of the catalyst needed in order to fulfill this prophecy. And what is absolutely terrifying is that even though others may have the wrong idea, it appears that Euron may know exactly what he's doing, and whatever he's planning, it's not good. Maester Aemon believed that Daenerys Targaryen was the fulfillment of a prophecy. Her, not Stannis, nor Prince Rhaegar, nor the princeling whose head was dashed against the wall. Born amid salt and smoke beneath the bleeding star, I know the prophecy. Marwyn turned his head and spat a gob of red phlegm onto the floor. Not that I would trust it. Gorgan of Old Gis once wrote that a prophecy is like a treacherous woman. She takes your member in her mouth, and you moan with the pleasure of it and think, how sweet, how fine, how good this is. And then her teeth snap shut, and your moans turn to screams. That is the nature of prophecy, said Gorgan. Prophecy will bite your prick off every time. Well, that about wraps things up for today. A link to a short video summarizing the fan theory of Melisandre's leeches is provided in the description box below. My next video will be out sometime in the next month and will be an examination of the Azor Ahai prophecy, so make sure that you hit that notification bell to receive notifications.
If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching!